I was born in 1952 in a small, quiet town in Mississippi, a place where the winds always carried the scent of freshly cut wood, and the sun set behind wide-open fields. It was a simple life, one marked by tradition and routine. Our little white house with blue trim creaked with every gust of wind, a home that seemed to hold all of our secrets in its weathered timbers. I was the oldest of 4 children. My siblings were Joshua, Eunice, and Arnold. Life in our house, though simple, was filled with expectations. My father, Gerald Williams, was a tall, thin man with restless eyes, always searching for something, but never quite finding it. He worked at the post office in town, and he was respected by the community. But inside our home, his restlessness was a storm. My mother, Dorothy, was a small, strict woman who taught at the local school. She was precise, always moving with purpose and with a strength that, though silent, was undeniably felt. In other homes, girls learned how to cook, sew, and keep house. But not in mine. My father had bigger dreams for me, dreams that made me feel both proud and, eventually, suffocated. "Mary has to be somebody," he'd say, slamming his hand on the table during dinner. "I didn't raise you to be some man's housewife." I'd sit there, listening to his words, feeling the weight of them press down on my chest. While the other girls in the neighborhood were playing in the yard or sitting with their mothers, learning how to make bread or fold laundry, I spent my days buried in books. At first, I didn't mind. It felt like an honor to be different, to be the girl who could read books far beyond her age. My father would bring books home from his trips to Atlanta, books that often didn't make sense to me, but he'd insist that I read them. He'd bang his fist on the table if I stammered over a word, telling me that I had to get it right or I was being lazy. My mother, who was a teacher, would correct my work with a red pen, circling mistakes as if they were the worst thing I could possibly do. In the Williams house, there was no room for mistakes. And there was certainly no room for weakness. "A girl who doesn't study ends up a slave to a man," my father would say. His words burned into my mind like a warning. If you're not perfect, you'll end up like your mother, washing a man's clothes for the rest of your life. For years, I lived in that pressure, day after day, week after week. It was like being suffocated slowly, until I didn't know where the pressure ended and I began. I wanted to please him. I wanted to be the daughter he dreamed of. But the more I tried, the more it seemed like nothing was enough. My friends began to fade away, their laughter replaced by the sound of my father's constant reprimands. I spent my days locked away in my room, reading, memorizing, and trying not to make mistakes. And yet, no matter how hard I worked, I never felt like I was doing it right. The worst part was that I started to believe his words. I began to think that maybe I wasn't good enough, that maybe I was lazy, or dumb, or weak. My mistakes became proof of that. If I didn't get a perfect grade, if I couldn't solve a problem the way he wanted, I felt like I was failing him. I felt like I was failing myself. And when my father would yell at me, the shame I felt made it hard to breathe. The pressure didn't just affect my schoolwork. It seeped into every part of my life. I started to pull away from everything. From my family. From my friends. From the things I once enjoyed. I started to feel this emptiness inside me, this darkness I couldn't explain. It wasn't until much later that I understood that what I was feeling was depression, but back then, there was no name for it. It was just me, trying to survive in a world that seemed to be closing in on me. And then there were the whispers. My father would say things like, "Don't be dramatic, Mary. There's no room for that in this house. Pull yourself together." There was no space to be anything other than what he wanted me to be. And if I wasn't what he wanted, if I couldn't be perfect, then I was just a failure. By the time I was 10, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The pressure had started to weigh on me in ways I couldn't escape. My mind would fog over, and even the simplest tasks became impossible. I could feel myself losing grip on something important, but I didn't know what it was. Every time I tried to focus, every time I tried to understand what was happening to me, it felt like I was falling deeper into a hole I couldn't climb out of. I don't remember exactly when it all started, but by the time I was 12, I could no longer ignore the heaviness in my chest. The weight of my father's expectations, the shame of never being good enough, and the feeling of never being seen for who I was, it had all come crashing down on me. There were days when I didn't want to get out of bed. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if life would ever feel normal again. I would cry in secret, hiding behind the house where no one could see me. I didn't understand what was happening to me, but I knew that something wasn't right. I wanted to escape. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. And so I became a shadow in my own life, moving through the days like an invisible figure. My father's voice grew louder, harsher, but it didn't have the power it once did. Somewhere, deep inside me, something was changing. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel it. And even though I didn't know it yet, this was the beginning of my resilience. It was a hot summer afternoon when my life started to unravel in ways I never thought possible. I was 13, just a girl on the edge of becoming a woman, still carrying the weight of my father's expectations on my shoulders. The changes in my body were confusing, unsettling. It wasn't just the awkwardness of growing up, it was the sudden pressure that came with it. My first period didn't come with a conversation or an explanation. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, feeling an odd warmth between my legs, only to realize what had happened. My mother didn't call me aside and explain with tenderness, like some of my friends' mothers did. Instead, she looked at me with a stern expression, almost as if I'd done something wrong. "Now you have to be even more careful," she said, her voice cold and pragmatic. "A girl who bleeds can get pregnant. If you get pregnant, your education is over." It wasn't a lesson on womanhood, but a warning about what could happen to me if I didn't adhere to the rules of the world my parents had set for me. No room for mistakes. No room for innocence. My life had already been defined by their strict expectations, but now there was an added weight. The fear of becoming a woman in a world that demanded perfection from me. The change in my body felt like the beginning of a slow suffocation. I no longer had the space to be just a girl. There were now consequences for every misstep. But the worst part wasn't the pressure to remain perfect. No, that came later, when I realized the pressure was more than just about grades. It was about control. My father's voice became louder in my life, a constant drumbeat demanding more and more from me, while I sank deeper into confusion, isolation, and self-doubt. As my body changed, so did my mind. It was as if the fog I had been living under thickened, darkened. School became a battlefield, not because I wasn't intelligent, but because I couldn't concentrate. I was consumed by the weight of my father's expectations and my growing fear of what he might do if I failed him. I would read the same page over and over again, unable to retain any information. The more I tried to focus, the more the pressure twisted inside me. My grades began to slip. Not because I didn't study, but because my mind couldn't function under the strain. Every time I looked at my report card, I could feel my father's angry gaze burning through me. "What's wrong with you?" he'd shout. "Why are you falling behind? You think this is some game? Get your act together." His words stung, but it wasn't just the words. It was the look of disappointment in his eyes, the feeling that no matter how hard I worked, I would never be enough. The truth was, I wasn't just struggling in school. I was struggling inside. A deep, gnawing emptiness had settled in my chest, something I couldn't explain. I began to withdraw from everything: friends, family, school. I could no longer keep up with the charade. My friends, once close, became distant. I no longer had the energy or desire to join in their games. They had no idea what was happening to me. I couldn't tell them, because I didn't even understand it myself. Then there was my father. Always there, looming over me like a storm that never passed. The more I tried to please him, the more he demanded. It became suffocating. I remember crying in secret, feeling ashamed of my emotions, as if I were weak for feeling anything at all. My father's words echoed in my head: "You're lazy. You're dramatic. You'll never get anywhere if you keep this up." I wanted to be strong, to rise above it, but I didn't know how. It wasn't long before my mental state began to deteriorate further. The weight of it all was too much. I started to wonder if there was a way out. Not out of school, not out of my responsibilities, but out of my own head. I began to feel like I was drowning, like I was suffocating in a life that wasn't mine. And no matter how hard I tried to breathe, the pressure kept pushing me down. At 14, I had my first real breakdown. My grades had hit rock bottom, and I was terrified of facing my father. I remember walking slowly, painfully, towards the house after getting my report card. My heart was racing, my hands trembling. I knew what awaited me inside. I could already hear his voice in my head. I could feel the sting of his words, even though he hadn't spoken them yet. When I stepped through the door, my father was sitting at the kitchen table, his face already flushed with anger. "Show me your report card," he demanded, his voice hard. My hands shook as I handed it to him. He looked at it, his face growing redder with rage. And then, without warning, he slammed it down on the table. "This is what you've done with all my sacrifices? You think I'm working myself to the bone for this? What the hell is wrong with you, girl?" He stood up, and before I could react, his hand came down hard across my face. The force of the slap knocked me backward, and I could taste the salt of my own tears mixing with the bitterness of fear. "This is for your own good," he shouted. "You're lazy, and you need to learn how to fix yourself." The sting on my face was nothing compared to the emotional pain I felt in that moment. His words weren't just a slap, they were a condemnation. I ran out of the house, desperate to escape. I hid behind the laundry tub in the backyard and cried until I could cry no more. It was in that moment, beneath the heavy Mississippi sky, that I made a decision. If I didn't get away, if I didn't change something, I wasn't sure I'd make it out alive. But there was no way to escape. Not yet. I spent the following weeks in a haze, trying to pretend that everything was okay. I threw myself into my studies, trying to make up for my failure, but the pressure only grew. The darker thoughts in my head began to multiply, and I found myself thinking about the unthinkable. It wasn't a desire to die, exactly, it was more like a desperate wish to escape from everything that had become my life. My family had no idea what was happening to me. They saw me as the good daughter, the one who studied, who followed the rules. They didn't know the secret I was hiding inside, the constant feeling of failure, the overwhelming pressure, the depression that had begun to take hold. I couldn't talk to anyone about it, because I was afraid they would just tell me to snap out of it, or stop being dramatic. I believed my own thoughts that I was weak, that I was the problem, not my circumstances. But things were about to change. I just didn't know it yet. The weight of my father's expectations continued to bear down on me, and with it, the sense of helplessness I couldn't shake. The days blurred together in a haze of constant stress, anxiety, and the crushing knowledge that no matter what I did, I could never meet his standards. I couldn't escape the constant, nagging thought that I was failing not just at school, but in life itself. The world I was trapped in felt too small, too suffocating. At 15, the world I had grown up in started to feel like a prison. I was no longer the little girl who had once found joy in simple things like playing outside or reading a book for hours. Now, all I could feel was the pressing need to get away, to escape. But I didn't know how. Where would I go? How would I survive? It was like my mind and body were fighting against me, each trying to hold me down, preventing me from finding the courage to break free. I had begun to isolate myself even more. School became a distant blur, a place where I walked through the motions without truly participating. I couldn't focus on the lessons. I couldn't concentrate on anything. My grades had slipped even further. I no longer cared about the work, nor did I care about the consequences. All I could think about was the suffocating weight of my father's disappointment and the empty feeling growing inside me. The emptiness, which had begun years ago, was now consuming me entirely. It felt like I was floating through life, but I wasn't alive. Then came the day everything changed. It wasn't a dramatic event, but rather a quiet conversation, one that didn't seem important at the time. My mother, who had always been silent in the face of my father's rage, finally spoke. She wasn't defending me, she never did. But there was something in her voice that felt different. A moment of clarity, a flicker of realization that I wasn't okay. Mary, you're not yourself anymore. I don't know what's going on inside you, but I can see it. You've changed, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she were afraid of what might come next. I didn't know how to answer. How could I explain the despair that had been slowly swallowing me? How could I tell her that I no longer recognized the girl I had once been? How could I explain that I couldn't breathe without feeling trapped, without feeling like I was suffocating under my father's expectations? But I didn't have to say anything. My mother's eyes were filled with a sadness that I could see all too clearly. She knew what had been happening. She knew the darkness that had crept into my life, but she couldn't fight it. Not while my father was in the picture. There was too much fear between them. Too much silence. And that's when I decided I had to leave. I couldn't stay. If I stayed, I wouldn't survive. I didn't know where I would go or how I would make it, but I couldn't stay in that house, in that town, with those memories. I couldn't stay in a place that had taken everything from me. The decision to leave wasn't made lightly. I had been planning for weeks, though I hadn't told anyone. In the dark hours of the night, when the house was still, I would sit on my bed and think about all the ways I could escape. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and I knew it would be dangerous. But I was desperate. I didn't have much. A few dollars, some old clothes, and the birth certificate I had hidden in a drawer for safekeeping. It wasn't much, but it would be enough. Enough to get me out of town, away from the constant pressure and the ever-present fear. The hardest part was leaving without a trace. My father would never let me go. He would never let me escape without making sure I paid for it. But I had a plan. I would leave in the dead of night, when he was asleep, when no one would be watching. I would slip away like a shadow, undetected, and never look back. I spent the next few days pretending everything was normal. I did my chores, kept my head down, and kept my mouth shut. My father didn't notice anything different. He didn't notice the quiet desperation in my eyes, or the way my hands trembled as I folded the laundry. He was too focused on his own world, on his anger, to see that his daughter was slipping away. Then, on the night I decided to leave, I couldn't bring myself to say goodbye to my siblings. I had to leave them behind, but the thought of abandoning them broke my heart. They were still so young: Joshua, 16, and Eunice, 14, and Arnold, 12, and I knew they were living in fear too. But I had to go. I couldn't save them all. Not yet. I left a letter for my sister and Eunice, the only one who might understand. I told her I was leaving, that I couldn't stay anymore. I didn't explain everything, but I left enough for her to know that I wasn't running away out of selfishness. I was running to survive. The night was quiet as I packed my few belongings into an old backpack. I made sure to take my birth certificate and the money I had saved from odd jobs. I didn't have a plan for what came next, but I knew I had to take the first step. I had to get out of that house, that town, that life. I walked out of the front door, my heart racing in my chest. The darkness of the night seemed to welcome me, as if it were wrapping me in its arms. I walked as quietly as I could, avoiding the creaky floorboards and the windows that could give me away. The cold night air hit my skin like a slap, but I didn't care. It was freedom, the first taste of freedom I had felt in years. The road ahead was uncertain. The small town I had grown up in seemed to stretch endlessly before me. There were no lights, no signs pointing the way. But I knew I had to keep moving forward. I couldn't go back. I couldn't face my father, my past. I had to keep going, no matter what. I made my way to the bus station, my heart pounding in my ears. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew I had to leave. I didn't know what the future held, but it had to be better than the nightmare I had been living. And so, I stood at that bus station in the cold, waiting for the bus that would take me to a new life, a new chance. The bus ride was long, and the hum of the wheels beneath me was like a metronome marking the seconds of my new life. Each mile that passed was a step further from the life I had known, from the house that held so much pain, from the man who had spent my childhood trying to break me. I could still feel the ache in my chest, a mixture of fear, grief, and determination. I was running from everything I had ever known, but I was also running towards something I couldn't yet see. I had no idea where I was going, only that I had to leave. The bus, an old greyhound that smelled faintly of stale coffee and worn leather, seemed to swallow me whole, isolating me in its quiet hum. I kept my head down, keeping my face hidden from the other passengers. I couldn't risk anyone recognizing me or hearing my story. I was just a girl with nothing but the clothes on her back, a few dollars in her pocket, and the birth certificate I had fought to keep safe. The journey took days. I passed through cities that felt too big, too intimidating. I stayed on the bus, my eyes pressed against the window as the landscape shifted from the quiet, rural fields of my childhood to the unfamiliar hustle of new places. I didn't talk to anyone. I kept to myself, staring out into the dark of the night, my mind constantly racing, thinking about what I had left behind and what lay ahead. The fear of being found, of my father tracking me down, never left me. It was a gnawing presence, like a shadow always lurking just out of sight. But despite the fear, there was also a strange sense of liberation. With every passing mile, the burden seemed to lighten, just a little. For the first time in my life, I was making my own decisions. I wasn't being told what to do. I wasn't being punished for every mistake, real or imagined. The world was now my own, and I was going to find my place in it, no matter how long it took. When the bus finally arrived in the city, I had no idea what to do. I had no plan, no friends, no family to turn to. But I did have a small stash of money I had saved from odd jobs, and I had my birth certificate. I had to keep moving, keep running. If I stopped, I might turn back, and I couldn't afford that. I wandered the streets of the city, aimlessly at first. The people seemed so different, so much busier than anything I had ever known. The fast pace, the noise, the lights, everything was overwhelming. But at the same time, it felt like a new beginning. I just had to figure out how to make it work. It was on that first night in the city, as I sat on a bench in the park with my head down, feeling lost and small, that a kind woman approached me. Her name was Catherine, and she was from a local health organization that helped women in need. She had been walking through the park, and something in her expression, her gentle, understanding smile, made me look up. She sat beside me without saying anything at first, just waiting for me to speak if I felt like it. "What's your name, dear?" she finally asked. I hesitated. I wasn't ready to share anything with a stranger, but there was something comforting in her presence. Maybe it was her calm demeanor or the fact that I had been alone for so long, but I felt safe with her, even if just for a moment. "Mary," I replied quietly, my voice shaky. "Mary Williams." Catherine studied me for a long time, her eyes soft, as if she could see the pain hidden beneath my calm exterior. She didn't rush me, didn't ask too many questions. She simply nodded and asked if I needed help. And that was the turning point. For the first time in months, I let my guard down. I explained, in fractured sentences, what had happened, the pressure at home, my father's cruelty, the escape. I left out the darkest parts of my story, the things I wasn't ready to share. But Catherine listened. She didn't judge. She just nodded, absorbing my words like she had heard this story before. "Mary," she said after a long pause, "I can't promise you that everything will be easy, but I can promise you that you won't have to face this alone anymore. You're not the first young woman I've met who's been in a similar situation. I can help you, but first, you have to trust me." I didn't know what to say. Trust has been so hard to come by in my life. I had been betrayed by the one person who should have protected me. But there was something about Catherine, something warm and unwavering in her eyes, that made me take the risk. "I'll help you find a place to stay," she continued, "and if you need work, I know people who can help with that too. It won't be much, but it'll be a start." I didn't have any better options. I agreed, and she led me to a small community shelter run by a group of women who took in young women like me, women in crisis, women looking for a fresh start. The shelter wasn't fancy. It was simple, with white walls and modest furniture, but it was a sanctuary. It was safe. The women who ran the shelter became my family. They were kind, patient, and understanding, and they saw me for who I was, not as a victim, but as someone who had been through hell, and still had the strength to keep going. They helped me find small jobs around the city, cleaning houses, washing dishes, doing laundry for people in the neighborhood. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it gave me a sense of purpose. Slowly, I started to regain a little of the confidence I had lost. I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could build a life for myself. But even in this new world, there were challenges. The fear of being found never completely disappeared. I couldn't shake the anxiety that gripped me every time someone knocked on the door, every time I heard a car pass by too slowly. My past was always lurking just behind me, ready to catch up, ready to destroy everything I had built. But I couldn't afford to look back. Not now. I had to keep moving forward. One day, a few months into my new life, Catherine approached me with an offer. She had been speaking to her colleagues and had found a way for me to continue my education, a chance to finish high school and maybe even pursue a career in nursing, something I had never considered. It was a long shot, but it was the opportunity one had been waiting for. I agreed, and she helped me get enrolled in a local program designed for women who had dropped out of school for various reasons. It wasn't easy, but I threw myself into it, determined to prove that I could make something of myself. As I worked through the program, I began to see a future where I wasn't defined by my past. I wasn't just a girl from a broken home. I wasn't just someone who had been hurt. I was someone who had survived, and I was going to thrive. For the first time in years, I had a dream. It was small, but it was mine. And with every passing day, I felt a little more in control of my own fate. By the time I enrolled in the program, I felt as though I was walking through life with a veil over my eyes, unsure of how to truly see or understand the world around me. But day by day, I pushed myself to learn, to face the uncomfortable truths about my past, and to confront the girl who had once been so full of fear. And in the process, I began to see something new: hope. The days at the shelter were filled with mundane tasks: waking up early to help with breakfast, tidying the communal spaces, studying in the small library that was set up in the corner of the shelter. But beneath the surface, every simple act was a step toward a new identity. The women I met there, the ones who ran the shelter, were my silent supporters. They never judged my mistakes or questioned my need to heal in my own time. It was in the shelter that I began to realize something important. The past didn't have to define me forever. Catherine's gentle insistence on me continuing my education helped me believe in that. She'd taken me in when I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a shattered sense of self-worth. The trust she showed in me, the way she believed in me even when I couldn't believe in myself, gave me the strength to take those first steps toward the woman I was becoming. Her quiet encouragement was like a light in the darkness, and slowly, that light began to shine through the cracks of my soul. Education was my lifeline. It wasn't just about books or grades, though they mattered. It was about proving to myself that I could do it. That I wasn't worthless. That my voice, my thoughts, my dreams mattered. And slowly, with every exam I passed, every lesson I understood, I started to feel like I was rebuilding something inside me. Each textbook I opened, each page I turned, was a thread woven into a new version of myself. At first, it was difficult. I had spent so many years being told I was lazy or weak that the notion of being smart or capable seemed foreign. I felt like an imposter. But then, as time went on, I realized that every word I read, every page I turned, was a victory. I was no longer that girl who had been told she would never amount to anything. I was becoming someone new, someone who was strong enough to fight for her future, no matter how long it took. The people who helped me along this path were the ones I least expected. I remember one evening at the shelter when a woman named Martha, who had been staying there for several years, pulled me aside after dinner. She had seen the toll my past was taking on me, the way I still flinched when someone raised their voice, or how I became withdrawn when I was overwhelmed. "You don't have to carry all of this alone," she told me, her voice surprisingly tender for someone who had lived through her own share of hardships. "I've seen too many women like you, strong, resilient women who've been beaten down by life. But the one thing they all had in common was this: they didn't give up. And neither will you." Those words stayed with me for a long time. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was on my own. It wasn't just the strangers who offered me shelter that made a difference. It was the women who had been through their own hells and had come out stronger on the other side. They understood what it meant to survive, to be battered by life but still rise. And they had been through worse. Yet here they were, living, breathing proof that survival was possible. Martha had been right. I didn't have to carry my pain alone. For the first time, I felt a sense of belonging, of solidarity. The women at the shelter became my family. They weren't just temporary fixtures in my life. They were the ones who helped shape the woman I would become. They showed me that there was strength in numbers, that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and that healing came not just from facing your own demons, but from sharing your story and letting others help you carry the weight. As I continued my studies, I also had to make ends meet. The shelter provided me with a small stipend for basic needs, but I couldn't rely on that forever. So, I took up odd jobs, cleaning houses, helping with childcare, running errands for people in the neighborhood. They were mundane tasks, but they brought a sense of purpose. More importantly, they allowed me to save money. Every dollar I earned was one step closer to independence, to creating a life I could call my own. It wasn't glamorous work, but it felt like freedom. I could buy my own groceries, pay for my own bus ticket when I needed to go to the city, and contribute to my own future. That sense of autonomy, something I had never felt before, was a form of power that no one could take away from me. It was empowering to know that I was finally doing something for myself, that I was building my future, brick by brick. One day, after finishing an afternoon job cleaning a local office building, I walked down the street, my heart a little lighter, when I bumped into Catherine again. She was with a group of other women, all wearing name tags from a local health clinic. "I see you're keeping busy, Mary," Catherine said with a smile, waving me over. I waved back, smiling shyly, before joining them. It was then that she shared the next step in her plan for me. "There's an opportunity at a health clinic downtown for women like you, people who've had a hard start but are looking to rebuild," Catherine said. "I've spoken to the director, and they're looking for someone to help with admin work, filing, and scheduling. It's not much, but it's a start, and it's a way to get your foot in the door." The offer stunned me. I had been so focused on finishing school that I hadn't even thought about work outside of the odd jobs I was doing. But this was different. It was a chance to work in an environment that would help me grow, a step toward something bigger. It was a chance to make a difference, to be part of something that mattered. I took the job. It wasn't easy at first. The work was more demanding than I expected, and the schedule was hectic. But it gave me structure, and I quickly became known as a reliable, hard-working employee. I was given more responsibilities as I proved myself, eventually handling the clinic's filing system and helping with patient records. I became part of a team, and for the first time, I had a real sense of accomplishment. I wasn't just doing something to survive, I was building a career. But even as I worked, there was always that voice in the back of my mind, the one that told me I wasn't good enough, that I didn't deserve this. I had to fight against that voice every single day. But over time, the voices around me, the women at the shelter, Catherine, the people at the clinic, started to drown out the negative ones. Their belief in me became louder than my doubts. While I was learning to live again, to rebuild myself piece by piece, there was one thing I knew. I couldn't move forward until I made peace with my past. I couldn't forget what had happened to me, but I had to come to terms with it. It wasn't going to be easy, but I needed to face the fear and the anger that had been festering inside me for so long. It was in this process of healing that I realized the true importance of speaking out. The stories of the women I met at the shelter and at the clinic helped me see that I wasn't alone. What had happened to me, though painful and horrific, was not unique. There were countless women, young and old, who had faced similar struggles, who had survived and rebuilt, who were still fighting to be heard. It was that realization that gave me the strength to tell my story. For so long, I had carried it like a burden, afraid of what would happen if I spoke the truth. But now I understand that my story could be a source of strength for others. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about creating a chain of hope, passing the torch to someone else who needed it. So, I began to share. It started with the women I worked with at the clinic. It started small, just telling them bits and pieces of my story, about my childhood, about my escape, about the pain I had carried for so long. Slowly, I began to see the change in myself. I was no longer hiding in the shadows. I was no longer just a survivor. I was a witness, someone who could speak the truth without fear. And in the sharing, I found peace. It wasn't instantaneous. It wasn't an easy process. But it was real. The more I told my story, the less power it had over me. I stopped being ashamed of it. I started to embrace it as part of who I was, part of the woman I had become. The days following my decision to tell my story and work through my trauma marked the beginning of a deeper transformation. For so long, I had felt like an outsider in my own life, drifting through each day without direction, without purpose. But as I began to open up and share my past, I started to feel more grounded. It was like I had taken the first real step toward reclaiming my power. At the health clinic where I worked, I continued to gain more responsibilities. I became more than just the person who filed papers and answered phones. I was trusted with managing patient schedules and even working directly with the doctors. Slowly, I earned their respect, not just for my work ethic but for the quiet strength that I had begun to build within myself. Every day, I grew a little stronger, a little more confident in my own abilities. The shame and fear that had once paralyzed me were slowly replaced by determination. But even as I flourished at work, there was still one thing missing in my life: connection. I was starting to realize that despite my progress, there were gaps in my soul, empty spaces where love had once been, but had been buried under years of pain and fear. I had distanced myself from others for so long, unwilling to trust anyone, unwilling to let myself be vulnerable. It was then that I began to realize something. To fully heal, I needed to open my heart again. Not just to my own family, but to the world around me. The idea of being loved, truly loved, seemed so foreign to me after everything I had been through. But one thing I had learned from my time at the shelter, from the women who shared their stories and their lives with me, was that love wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. One of the unexpected gifts of my time at the clinic was meeting Janet, a woman who had become a close friend. She had been through her own struggles, having survived a violent marriage and the loss of her first child to an accident. Her story, much like mine, was marked by pain, but it was also full of resilience and strength. There was something about Janet's spirit that reminded me of the women I had met in the shelter, the women who had fought their own battles and come out the other side. Janet was the first person to truly see me for who I was. She saw beyond the walls I had built around myself and understood my need for connection. We became fast friends, meeting weekly to share stories over cups of coffee and homemade bread. It was through Janet that I began to understand the importance of community, of having people who genuinely cared about me, who wanted nothing more than to see me thrive. She helped me in ways that went beyond friendship. Janet would often take me to church on Sundays, where I slowly began to rediscover my faith. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but over time, I felt a sense of peace in the quiet moments of prayer and reflection. I had spent so many years fighting the world, trying to survive without a sense of belonging. But in these quiet moments of connection, I started to realize that I had never truly been alone. There had always been a higher power guiding me, even when I didn't understand it. But Janet wasn't just a friend. I began to see her as a mentor. She taught me how to open up to the world around me and showed me that there was nothing wrong with being vulnerable, with letting others see the pain that I had spent so many years trying to hide. Through Janet, I learned that there was strength in allowing others to support me, that I didn't have to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders alone. As I continued to grow emotionally and spiritually, I became more open to the possibility of love. But I didn't expect it to come from someone like him, Ernest. I first met Ernest during a routine checkup at the clinic. He was a farmer, a simple man with a quiet demeanor, but there was something about him that intrigued me. He was kind, patient, and never once pushed me to talk about my past. He simply accepted me for who I was in the present moment, something that few people had ever done. There was no judgment in his eyes, just a quiet understanding that I couldn't yet comprehend. At first, I resisted the idea of getting close to anyone, especially a man. The trauma I had endured left me with a deep sense of mistrust, particularly when it came to men. But Ernest was different. His gentle nature and his respect for my space made me feel safe, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Over time, our relationship blossomed into something beautiful, slow, and steady, just like the love I had always dreamed of but never thought I deserved. Ernest never pushed me to talk about my past. Instead, he showed me love in the simplest of ways. He would bring me fresh vegetables from his farm, helping me to learn about farming and the value of hard work. He never once made me feel like I had to explain myself, and in that, he gave me something priceless: acceptance. Over the months, I began to realize that love wasn't just about passion or grand gestures, it was about trust, respect, and a willingness to stand by someone through both the good and the bad. Ernest showed me that love wasn't something to be feared, it was something to be embraced. As I continued to heal emotionally and build my life, I began to feel a longing for something I had always dreamed of, a family of my own. But after all the trauma, I wasn't sure if it was even possible. The scars from my past ran deep, and I wasn't sure if I could ever be the kind of mother I had always wanted to be. But Ernest had a different idea. He was patient and supportive in a way I had never experienced before. He didn't just want to build a life with me, he wanted to build a family. And after years of trying to come to terms with my infertility, I began to accept that the family I had always dreamed of didn't have to look like I had once imagined. It didn't have to be made from my own blood, it could be built on love, trust, and the bonds that are formed when two people share their lives. In 1980, Ernest and I adopted a little boy, Matthew, who had been abandoned at the door of a local hospital. It was a decision that changed everything. When I held him for the first time, I knew I had found the love I had been searching for. He was perfect, even in his imperfection, and I could feel the deep connection between us. My heart swelled with a love I never thought I was capable of, and for the first time in years, I felt whole. A year later, we adopted another child, Claire, a little girl who had lost both of her parents in an accident. She was quiet and shy at first, but over time, she blossomed into a vibrant, curious child. With Ernest by my side and our two children in our care, I began to realize that my dreams of having a family had come true, but not in the way I had expected. Building this new family, creating a life for my children, and giving them the love I had never received as a child became my new purpose. Every day, I poured myself into being the best mother I could be, trying to give my children the stability, love, and care they deserved. And in the process, I realized something important. Love, when it is given freely and without conditions, has the power to heal the deepest of wounds. The years following our adoption of Matthew and Claire were filled with transformation and growth. Life, once so laden with sorrow, began to shift in ways I had never anticipated. The healing I had longed for, so elusive in the past, came in small but meaningful doses. There were still hard days when the shadows of my past crept back in, trying to reclaim me, but more often than not, I felt a deep sense of peace that had seemed impossible in those earlier, darker years. The first few years after our adoptions were filled with the joy of watching my children grow, learn, and discover the world around them. Every day brought new milestones, Matthew's first words, Claire's first steps. I marveled at how easily they accepted me, how they seemed to sense my love for them, even though it was wrapped in the scars of my past. They were the greatest gift I had ever received, and in many ways, they were my salvation. When Ernest and I first settled into our home in Bakersfield, I was still in the process of reclaiming my life, but I began to see the significance of the life we were building. Ernest, who had shown me what true partnership looked like, continued to stand by me, offering his love and support with unwavering patience. We worked together to turn our house into a home, planting gardens, building spaces for the children to play, and creating memories that I could cherish forever. It was in this peaceful, slow-paced life that I discovered the power of purpose. I began to explore crafts more deeply, delving into the creation of intricate quilts, crochet pieces, and other textiles. My hands, once used for survival, now worked with a different intention: healing. The rhythmic movements of knitting and crochet became my form of therapy. Each piece I made seemed to stitch together a small part of my broken heart, slowly making me whole again. I started selling my creations at local fairs, and as the business grew, so did my confidence. What had started as a way to fill my time and keep my hands busy grew into a small business that brought me a sense of pride and purpose. I realized that I had something to offer the world, that the pain I had endured could be transformed into something beautiful and meaningful. This was my redemption, not just for myself, but for those who had come into my life and allowed me to heal. As my life continued to stabilize, I began to feel the desire to give back. I had received so much love and support from people like Mrs. Thompson, Mrs. Miller, and Janet, and I wanted to offer that same kind of kindness to others. I began hosting craft workshops for local women, teaching them how to crochet, knit, and quilt. Many of these women had their own stories of struggle and hardship, and through our shared love of crafting, we began to build a community of support. There was something powerful about seeing other women find healing through crafts, just as I had. It was as if the simple act of creating something with our hands allowed us to weave together not just fabric, but our own narratives. I taught them techniques, yes, but more importantly, I taught them about the importance of sharing our stories, of finding solidarity in our struggles. Through these workshops, I began to form deep friendships with the women in the community. We weren't just learning crafts together. We were learning about resilience, about rebuilding, about transforming our pain into something that could help others. I realized that these women, just like me, had been broken, but through their strength, they were becoming whole again. As the years passed, my life became more and more full. Ernest and I had our moments of joy, of course, but we also experienced loss. In 1983, Ernest was diagnosed with lung cancer, and though we fought with everything we had, he passed away that year. The grief that followed was unlike anything I had ever known. He had been my rock, the person who helped me build the life I had always dreamed of. But even in my sorrow, I understood something important. The love we shared was eternal. It wasn't bound by time or by the limitations of this world. It was something that lived on in my children, in the work we had done together, and in every memory we had created. Ernest's death was a defining moment in my life, one that taught me how to embrace the pain without letting it destroy me. I learned that love wasn't just about holding on, it was also about letting go, about cherishing what we had without trying to hold it captive. And even in his absence, I knew that his love would continue to guide me, just as my love for him would carry on. In the years after Ernest's death, I focused on building a life for my children. Matthew, now a successful farmer, continued to manage the land we had worked so hard to cultivate. He had his own family now, with a wife and 2 children of his own. Claire had grown into a woman who carried the strength of our family legacy within her. She had become a nurse, and though we didn't talk much about the past, I knew that her career was a reflection of the love and care I had always wanted to give her. She had turned out to be everything I had dreamed of, a strong, compassionate woman who had built her own future. In 1993, I became a grandmother when Matthew's son, Peter, was born. I remember the first time I held him in my arms, feeling the weight of the years fall away. The little hands that clutched my finger seemed to erase the pain of the past, reminding me that life, in its unpredictable beauty, could give us second chances. I looked at Peter and saw the future, a future filled with possibilities that I had never thought would be mine. Through my children and grandchildren, I came to understand the power of legacy. I had once believed that my story, marked by violence and pain, was something to hide, something to be ashamed of. But in seeing my children grow, in watching them create families of their own, I realized that my story wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was part of the tapestry of my life, and it had made me who I was. And in sharing my story, I was passing on a legacy of strength, resilience, and the possibility of healing. As technology advanced, so did my connection with the world. I was introduced to social media by my great-niece, Taylor, who had seen the power of storytelling. I was hesitant at first, unsure of what I had to offer in a world so different from the one I had known. But with Taylor's encouragement, I began to share my story online, writing about my life, my craft, and the lessons I had learned. To my surprise, my posts gained traction, and women from all over the world reached out to me, sharing their own stories of survival and healing. What I had once considered to be a personal, painful experience became a source of strength and inspiration for others. The women who connected with me, who thanked me for sharing my truth, reminded me that my story mattered. And through their messages, I realized that the pain of the past was not a curse, but a powerful tool for connecting with others. I learned that storytelling wasn't just about reliving old wounds. It was about sharing the lessons we've learned, the wisdom we've gained, and the hope we carry for the future. I was no longer just telling my story for myself. I was telling it for every woman who had ever felt lost, who had ever felt alone, who had ever felt like her story didn't matter. As I sit here today, at 73, reflecting on the journey that has brought me to this point, I am filled with a deep sense of peace. My life hasn't been perfect, and I still carry the scars of my past. But I have come to understand that it's those scars that make me who I am. They are a testament to my strength, to my resilience, and to the fact that I survived. I have rebuilt my life. I have found peace, purpose, and a new sense of belonging. My hands, which once carried the weight of trauma, now create beauty. My heart, once broken, now holds a deep love for my family, for the life I've created, and for the people who have walked alongside me in this journey. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. The journey to healing isn't linear. There are good days, and there are bad days. But as long as we keep moving forward, as long as we keep breathing, there is always hope. I am proud of the woman I've become, proud of the strength I've found in the face of adversity. And I am grateful for every step of the journey, every person who helped me along the way, and for the life that I continue to build every single day. Thank you for walking this path with me. My story is far from over, and neither is yours. The power to rebuild, to heal, and to transform our lives is within all of us. And that is a truth that will never fade. As I sit here now, my hands folded gently in my lap, I find it hard to believe that I've told this story. I suppose we all carry within us a great river of memories, some clear and bright, others dark and murky, hidden in the quiet folds of time. My story, like a river, has carved deep valleys within me, but it has also shaped me, as rivers do with the land. And sometimes we wait, don't we? We wait for the right moment, the right kind of stillness, to allow the waters of the past to flow. I was once afraid that my truth would drown me, that if I spoke of the storms I'd weathered, the waters might rise higher than I could breathe. But I've learned, as the years have passed, that the more you hold on to your pain, the more it binds you. And it is only by sharing, by letting the water spill over the banks, that you find the freedom to finally swim. So, why tell this story now? Perhaps it's because time is a gift, a gentle teacher that shows you how to stand tall in the face of what you've endured. Perhaps it's because in the quiet hum of the years, I've learned that the weight of the past can only be lifted when you lay it down at your own feet and let it go. It is only now, after all this time, that I understand that my story, my life, is not just my own, it belongs to anyone who has ever known sorrow, anyone who has ever fought to reclaim their heart from the hands that tried to break it. To those who may be watching, who have walked paths darker than the night, know this: you are not broken. You are a tree that bends with the storm, but you do not break. You will rise again. You will find your roots. If there's one thing I've learned in my years, it's this: that even in the harshest winters, the seed of hope is still there, waiting to bloom. It may take time, it may take courage, but there is a garden waiting for you, just beyond the pain. And in that garden, there is room for every story, every wound, every scar. Legacy, it's a word that haunts me and heals me in equal measure. We leave behind what we choose, our wisdom, our love, our strength, our art. This story I've shared with you is a thread in the great tapestry of my life, and perhaps in yours too. It is woven into the lives of my children, my grandchildren, and to all of you who hear it, in hopes that it may inspire courage in your own hearts. We don't live forever in the flesh, but we live on in the stories we tell, in the love we give, and in the lives we touch. If you've found something here that stirs you, something that offers a flicker of light in your own darkness, I ask you to share it. A like, a comment, and subscribe, a quiet moment of connection. That's all we need sometimes, to know we are not alone. You never know, your story may just be the lifeline someone else is waiting for. And so, my dear ones, as I close this chapter, know that it is not an ending, but a turning of the page. This story, like me, is still unfolding, still finding its way in the world. I am Mary Elizabeth, but perhaps, like you, I am someone else entirely too. We all are. We are shaped by the winds, but we are not defined by them. And now, as I let this story go into the world, I'll take a deep breath, for in this breath, there is freedom, there is rebirth. Good night, and may your heart always know the way back home.